You know what I realized when I was sitting in that audition room in Mumbai, 23 years old, fresh off winning Miss World? Thinking I had the world figured out, I realized I was about to beg, not with words, but with my energy, my desperation, my need to be chosen. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I looked at myself in that mirror and said, Priyanka, if you have to beg for this, then this isn't meant for you. That was the day I learned the most important lesson of my life. The day I learned that begging for love, attention, or respect isn't just undignified, it's impossible. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you: anything you have to beg for, you've already lost. Look around you right now. Look at the person sitting next to you. Look at yourself. Look at your life. How many times have you found yourself in that position? How many times have you sent that extra text message? How many times have you stayed late at work hoping someone would notice? How many times have you compromised your values, dimmed your light, made yourself smaller, all in the hope that someone would love you a little more, notice you a little longer, respect you a little deeper? I'm here to tell you today that your begging days are over. Not because I'm going to give you some magic formula, not because I'm going to hand you a list of rules to follow, but because I'm going to help you remember who you are. I'm going to help you remember that you are not here to audition for anyone's love. You are not here to perform for anyone's attention. You are not here to earn anyone's respect. You are here to give those things to yourself first, and then to share them with the world from a place of abundance, not scarcity. My name is Priyanka Chopra, and I've spent the last 2 decades of my life building a career that spans continents, cultures, and industries. I've been blessed to work in Bollywood, Hollywood, to start businesses, to represent my country on global stages. But none of that happened because I begged for it. It happened because I learned to stop begging and start being. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about mental strength. Not the kind that comes from gritting your teeth and pushing through pain, though sometimes that's necessary. I'm talking about the kind of mental strength that comes from knowing your worth so deeply that you never question it. The kind that comes from understanding that your value isn't determined by other people's opinions, reactions, or choices. When I was 17, I remember my mother saying something to me that I didn't understand at the time. She said, "Beta, the moment you need someone to complete you, you've forgotten that you're already whole." I thought it was just something mothers say, you know. Something wise sounding but not really practical. It wasn't until years later, when I found myself in Los Angeles, trying to break into Hollywood, that I understood what she meant. I was in meetings where I was the only Indian woman in the room. I was being told to change my name, to lose my accent, to make myself more palatable to American audiences. And for a moment, just a moment, I considered it. Because I wanted to belong, I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be loved by this industry that seemed so glamorous, so important. I was on the verge of begging with my very identity. But then I remembered my mother's words. I remembered that I was already whole, that my name, my accent, my culture, these weren't obstacles to overcome. They were gifts to share. The moment I stopped trying to fit into their box and started bringing my own box to the table, everything changed. See, mental strength isn't about being tough all the time. It's about being authentic all the time. It's about showing up as yourself, completely and unapologetically, regardless of who's in the room. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is a fictional character, but she represents hundreds of real women I've met over the years. Sarah works in marketing. She's brilliant, creative, hardworking. But Sarah has a problem. She's in love with someone who treats her like an option. He calls when he's bored, disappears when he's busy, shows up when it's convenient, and vanishes when it's not. Sarah knows this isn't right. Her friends tell her this isn't right. Her family tells her this isn't right. But Sarah keeps hoping that if she just loves him a little harder, if she just makes herself a little more available, if she just proves her worth a little more convincingly, he'll suddenly realize how amazing she is and commit to her fully. Sarah is begging. She's not saying, "Please love me," with words, but she's saying it with her actions. She's saying it with her availability. She's saying it with her willingness to accept scraps when she deserves the whole meal. And here's what Sarah doesn't understand: the very act of begging guarantees that she'll never get what she wants. Because when you beg for someone's love, you're telling them that you don't believe you deserve it freely given. You're telling them that you think so little of yourself that you're willing to accept whatever scraps they throw your way. Love isn't something you earn through good behavior. Respect isn't something you win through perfect performance. Attention isn't something you capture through desperation. These things are either given freely or they're not real. I learned this lesson the hard way in my early career in Bollywood. I was working with a director who had this way of making actors feel small. He would ignore you for days, then suddenly shower you with attention, then ignore you again. It was like psychological warfare, and I found myself working harder and harder to win his approval. I would show up to set early, stay late, say yes to every change, every demand, every last-minute request. I was performing not just my role, but performing for his validation, and the more I performed, the less respect I received. One day, my co-star, who was much more experienced than I was, pulled me aside. He said, "Priyanka, what are you doing? You're one of the most talented actors I've worked with, but you're acting like you're grateful just to be here. Stop being so grateful. Start being excellent." That was a wake-up call. I realized I had been begging for this director's approval instead of simply doing excellent work and letting that speak for itself. The next day, I showed up different. I showed up as a professional who belonged there, not as someone auditioning for the right to stay. The change in how I was treated was immediate. Not because I became difficult or demanding, but because I stopped telegraphing desperation. I stopped begging with my energy. This is what mental strength looks like. It looks like showing up as yourself, doing your best work, offering your authentic self, and then letting the chips fall where they may. It looks like understanding that your worth isn't up for negotiation. But let's be honest about something. This is easier said than done. We live in a world that profits from your insecurity. We live in a world that makes money from convincing you that you're not enough as you are. Social media algorithms are designed to make you compare yourself to others. Advertising is designed to make you believe you need something external to be complete. Dating apps are designed to make you believe love is scarce and you better grab whatever you can get. We're surrounded by messages that tell us to beg for likes, beg for follows, beg for swipes, beg for attention, beg for validation, beg for love. But here's what they don't tell you. The most attractive thing about a person isn't their desperation. It's their wholeness. It's their ability to be complete on their own. It's their ability to offer their gifts to the world without needing anyone to validate those gifts. Think about the people in your life who you most admire. I bet they're not the ones who are constantly seeking approval. They're not the ones who are always performing for validation. They're the ones who seem comfortable in their own skin. They're the ones who can be alone without being lonely. They're the ones who give their love, attention, and respect freely, not as a bargaining chip. That's mental strength. That's what we're building here today. Now, let me tell you about a time when I almost lost sight of this. It was 2017, and I was working on Quantico. The show was a huge opportunity for me, the first South Asian woman to headline an American network drama. I felt the weight of that responsibility every single day. I felt like I was representing not just myself, but my entire culture, my entire country. The pressure was immense, and I started doing something dangerous. I started trying to be perfect. I started trying to be what I thought everyone needed me to be instead of who I actually was. I was begging for acceptance with my perfectionism. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating properly. I was saying yes to everything, appearing at every event, doing every interview, taking every meeting. I was running on empty, but I couldn't stop because I was afraid that if I slowed down, if I showed any weakness, if I made any mistakes, I would lose everything. One day, I collapsed on set. Literally collapsed. I was hospitalized for exhaustion. As I lay in that hospital bed, I realized what I had done. I had forgotten my own lesson. I had started begging again. Not for love this time, but for acceptance, for approval, for the right to belong in Hollywood. My mother flew in from Mumbai. She sat by my bed and said, "Beta, you're trying so hard to be what they want that you're forgetting to be who you are. They didn't hire you to be like everyone else. They hired you to be Priyanka Chopra." That was my reminder. That was my wake-up call. I had to remember that I wasn't there to prove that I belonged. I was there because I already belonged. I had to stop begging for my place at the table and remember that I had earned my seat. The next day, I made some changes. I started saying no to things that didn't align with who I was. I started prioritizing my health, my relationships, my values. I started showing up as myself again, not as who I thought everyone wanted me to be. And you know what happened? The work got better. My performance got stronger. My relationships got deeper. Everything improved when I stopped begging and started being. This is the paradox of begging for love, attention, and respect. The more you beg for these things, the less likely you are to receive them, because begging comes from a place of scarcity, and scarcity repels the very things you're seeking. Let me explain what I mean by scarcity versus abundance. When you're operating from scarcity, you believe that love is limited, that attention is rare, that respect is hard to come by. You believe that if someone doesn't love you, nobody will. You believe that if this opportunity doesn't work out, no other will. You believe that if you don't get this person's attention, you'll be invisible forever. This scarcity mindset makes you desperate. It makes you clingy. It makes you compromise your values and dim your light. It makes you beg. But when you operate from abundance, you understand that love is infinite, that the right attention will find you naturally, that respect flows to those who respect themselves first. You understand that if someone doesn't appreciate you, that's information about them, not about you. You understand that if an opportunity doesn't work out, it's because there's a better one coming. You understand that your worth isn't determined by any single person's opinion or choice. This abundance mindset makes you magnetic. It makes you confident without being arrogant. It makes you generous with your love while still maintaining healthy boundaries. It makes you attractive in the deepest sense of the word. Let me share a story about abundance versus scarcity that changed my perspective completely. I was at a party in Los Angeles, and I met this woman, let's call her Lisa. Lisa was beautiful, successful, intelligent. On paper, she had everything. But within 5 minutes of talking to her, I could feel her desperation. She was name-dropping. She was seeking validation for every statement she made. She was constantly looking around the room to see if there was someone more important she should be talking to. Later that same evening, I met another woman, let's call her Maya. Maya wasn't conventionally beautiful. She wasn't famous. She wasn't wealthy. But there was something about her that drew everyone in. She listened more than she spoke. She asked genuine questions. She seemed genuinely interested in the people around her, not because she wanted something from them, but because she found them interesting. By the end of the night, everyone wanted to be around Maya. Lisa, despite all her advantages, was standing alone. That's the difference between scarcity and abundance. Lisa was operating from a belief that she needed to prove her worth to everyone in the room. Maya was operating from a knowledge that she was already worthy and therefore could give her attention freely to others. This is what mental strength looks like in practice. It looks like Maya, not Lisa. Now, I want to talk to you about something that might make you uncomfortable. I want to talk about the difference between wanting and needing. It's okay to want love. It's okay to want attention. It's okay to want respect. These are natural human desires, and there's nothing wrong with them. The problem comes when wanting turns into needing. When you need someone else's love to feel lovable, you'll do anything to get it, including betraying yourself. When you need someone else's attention to feel important, you'll perform and contort yourself into whatever shape you think they want. When you need someone else's respect to feel respectable, you'll compromise your values and dim your light. Need makes you desperate. Want allows you to be selective. When you want something, you can choose whether or not to pursue it based on whether it aligns with your values, your goals, your authentic self. When you need something, You don't have a choice. You'll take it however you can get it from whoever will give it to you under whatever conditions they set. I want you to think about this distinction in your own life. Where are you operating from want, and where are you operating from need? Where are you choosing? Where are you desperate? In my early 20s, I needed validation from the film industry. I needed to be accepted, to be cast, to be appreciated. That need made me vulnerable to manipulation. It made me willing to accept less than I deserved. It made me beg, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly. But as I grew older and more secure in myself, that need transformed into want. I wanted to work with good directors, but I didn't need to work with bad ones just to stay relevant. I wanted to be appreciated for my work, but I didn't need everyone to like me personally. I wanted respect, but I didn't need it from people who didn't respect themselves. This transformation from need to want is the essence of mental strength. It's the difference between being a victim of your circumstances and being the author of your life. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with my friend, and I'm going to use her real name because she's given me permission, Deepika Padukone. We were talking about relationships, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, "Priyanka, I used to think that being vulnerable meant making myself small so that others would feel comfortable taking care of me. Now I realize that real vulnerability is showing up as your full self and trusting that the right people will love you for it and the wrong people will leave." That's profound, isn't it? We've been taught that vulnerability means weakness, that it means making ourselves smaller, more manageable, less threatening. But real vulnerability is the opposite. Real vulnerability is showing up fully, completely, authentically, and trusting the process. When you beg for love, you're not being vulnerable. You're being strategic. You're calculating what you think the other person wants to hear, how you think you should behave, what you think will make them choose you. That's not vulnerability. That's manipulation, even if it's unconscious. Real vulnerability is saying, "This is who I am. This is what I value. This is what I need. This is what I can give." If that works for you, wonderful. If it doesn't, I understand. Real vulnerability is the ultimate expression of mental strength because it requires you to be okay with being rejected for who you really are. It requires you to trust that being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't truly see you or value you. I learned this lesson in one of my most important relationships. I'm not going to share all the details because that wouldn't be fair to the other person. But I will say this, there was a time when I was so afraid of losing this person that I started editing myself. I stopped expressing opinions they might disagree with. I started agreeing with things I didn't actually agree with. I started becoming who I thought they wanted me to be instead of who I actually was. And you know what happened? The relationship became hollow. They were falling in love with a performance, not with me. And I was falling out of love with myself. One day, I realized that if I had to pretend to be someone else to keep this person in my life, then I wasn't actually keeping them in my life at all. I was keeping a stranger who happened to like my performance. So I made a choice. I decided to be myself completely and authentically, and let the relationship either deepen or end based on that truth. It was terrifying. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done in a relationship, but it was also liberating. Because for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The relationship did change. It had to, because I had changed. And while it was difficult and painful at times, it became real in a way it had never been before. We were finally seeing each other clearly, not through the filter of performance and people-pleasing. That's what happens when you stop begging and start being. Your relationships become real. Some of them won't survive the transition, and that's okay. The ones that do survive will be deeper, more authentic, more fulfilling than anything you could have achieved through begging. Now, let's talk about attention. We live in an attention economy, don't we? Social media has turned attention into a currency, and many of us have become addicted to it. We post photos and wait for likes. We share our thoughts and wait for comments. We perform our lives for an audience of people we've never met, seeking validation from strangers. But here's the thing about attention. The attention you have to perform for isn't worth having. Real attention, the kind that nourishes you, the kind that sees you, comes naturally when you're being authentic. You don't have to do tricks for it. You don't have to be someone you're not to get it. I remember when I first joined Instagram, I was so excited about connecting with my fans directly. But I quickly fell into the trap of performing for likes. I found myself choosing what to post based not on what felt authentic to me, but on what I thought would get the most engagement. I was posting photos that weren't really me, sharing thoughts that weren't really mine, creating a persona that was designed to be likable rather than real. And you know what? I was miserable. I was getting attention, but it didn't feel good because it wasn't for me. It was for a character I was playing. One day, I posted a photo of myself without makeup, hair messy, looking completely ordinary. I almost deleted it because I was worried it wouldn't get as many likes as my more polished posts. But something stopped me. I realized I was about to delete myself to make room for a performance. That post ended up being one of my most engaging ever. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. People could sense the authenticity, and they responded to it. That taught me something important. When you're being authentic, you don't have to work for attention. It comes naturally. The right people are drawn to authenticity like flowers are drawn to the sun. But when you're performing for attention, you're always exhausted. You're always on. You're always calculating, always strategizing, always wondering if you're doing enough, being enough, giving enough to keep people interested. That's not sustainable. That's not fulfilling. That's not living. Mental strength means being willing to be ignored by the wrong people so you can be truly seen by the right ones. Let me tell you about respect. Respect is perhaps the trickiest of these three because we've been taught that respect is something you earn through achievement, through status, through proving yourself worthy. But that's not respect. That's recognition. Respect is different. Respect is about how you treat yourself and how you allow others to treat you. It's about your boundaries, your standards, your values. You can't earn respect from someone who doesn't respect themselves. You can't earn respect from someone who fundamentally doesn't value what you bring to the table. But you can command respect by respecting yourself so completely that it becomes impossible for others to treat you otherwise. I learned this lesson in a business meeting early in my career. I was pitching a project to a group of executives, and one of them kept interrupting me, dismissing my ideas, speaking to me in a condescending tone. I kept trying harder to prove my point, speaking louder, bringing more data, getting more passionate. But the more I tried to earn his respect through performance, the less respect I received. Finally, I stopped. I looked at him calmly and said, "I can see that you're not interested in what I have to say. That's perfectly fine. When you are interested, I'll be happy to continue this conversation." And then I packed up my materials and prepared to leave. The shift in the room was immediate. He apologized. He asked me to continue. He started listening instead of performing his own importance. I didn't earn his respect by proving myself worthy of it. I commanded his respect by respecting myself enough to walk away from disrespect. That's mental strength. That's what it means to never beg for respect. Now, I want to address something that might be going through your mind. You might be thinking, this is all well and good, Priyanka, but what if I'm lonely? What if I'm single and I want to find love? What if I'm struggling in my career and I need support? What if I genuinely need these things? I hear you. I understand. Loneliness is real. Professional struggles are real. The need for connection and support is real and valid. But here's what I want you to understand. There's a difference between seeking connection and begging for it. There's a difference between asking for support and desperating for validation. There's a difference between being open to love and being desperate for anyone's love. When you seek connection from a place of wholeness, you attract genuine connection. When you ask for support from a place of strength, you receive real support. When you're open to love from a place of self-love, you attract healthy love. But when you beg for these things from a place of desperation, you attract people who are drawn to desperation, and those are not the people you want in your life. Let me give you an example. Two people go on dating apps. Person A creates a profile that authentically represents who they are, their real interests, their real photos, their real personality. They swipe thoughtfully, looking for genuine compatibility. When they meet someone, they show up as themselves, ask questions they're genuinely curious about, and pay attention to whether they actually enjoy this person's company. Person B creates a profile designed to appeal to as many people as possible. They swipe frantically, desperate for matches. When they meet someone, they perform the version of themselves they think this person wants to see. They ignore red flags because they're so grateful to have someone's attention. Who do you think is more likely to find genuine love? Who do you think is more likely to end up in a healthy, fulfilling relationship? Person A, obviously, because person A is seeking connection from abundance, while person B is begging for it from scarcity. The same principle applies to friendships, to career relationships, to every area of your life. When you're operating from wholeness, you attract wholeness. When you're operating from brokenness, you attract brokenness. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It doesn't mean you can't have needs or vulnerabilities or struggles. It means you address those things from a place of self-responsibility rather than looking for someone else to fix them for you. I want to share something personal with you. A few years ago, I went through a period of real loneliness. I was traveling constantly for work. I was in a new country. I was building a new career in Hollywood while maintaining my career in Bollywood. I was successful on paper, but I felt disconnected, isolated, unseen. My first instinct was to try harder to make friends. I started saying yes to every invitation, even ones that didn't interest me. I started texting people constantly, trying to stay on their radar. I started performing a more agreeable, more available version of myself. But the lonelier I felt, the more desperate I became. And the more desperate I became, the more people seemed to pull away from me. One night, I was lying in my apartment in New York, and I realized what was happening. I was begging for friendship. I was so afraid of being alone that I was willing to accept superficial connections, surface-level relationships, friendships based on convenience rather than genuine compatibility. So I made a different choice. I decided to focus on being the kind of friend I wanted to have. Instead of trying to get people to like me, I focused on genuinely liking people. Instead of trying to be interesting, I focused on being interested. Instead of trying to be invited to things, I started creating the kinds of experiences I wanted to have and inviting others to join me. The shift was remarkable. When I stopped begging for friendship and started offering authentic friendship, real connections began to form. Not with everyone, not even with most people, but with the right people. And I learned something important. It's better to have one real friend than 10 superficial ones. It's better to be alone than to be with people who don't really see you. It's better to wait for genuine connection than to settle for counterfeit intimacy. That's mental strength. That's what it means to never beg for love, attention, or respect. Now, let's talk about boundaries, because you can't build mental strength without understanding boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They're not about keeping people out. They're about defining where you end and other people begin. They're about protecting your energy, your values, your peace of mind. When you beg for love, attention, or respect, you're essentially telling people that your boundaries are negotiable. You're telling them that you're willing to compromise yourself to get what you want from them. But strong boundaries are non-negotiable. They're not suggestions. They're not starting points for negotiation. They're clear statements about how you will and will not be treated. I learned about boundaries the hard way in my early career. I was so grateful for opportunities that I said yes to everything. I worked on projects that didn't align with my values. I accepted treatment that wasn't respectful. I compromised my health, my relationships, my peace of mind because I was afraid that if I set boundaries, opportunities would disappear. But you know what happened. The lack of boundaries led to more disrespect, not less. The willingness to accept poor treatment led to worse treatment, not better. The inability to say no led to being asked to do more inappropriate things, not fewer. It wasn't until I learned to set clear boundaries that my career actually improved. It wasn't until I learned to say no to the wrong things that I was able to say yes to the right things. Boundaries aren't about being difficult or demanding or high maintenance. They're about being clear. They're about saying, this is who I am. This is what I value. This is how I operate. If that works for you, great. If it doesn't, I understand. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say you're in a relationship with someone who consistently shows up late to plans with you. This makes you feel disrespected and undervalued. You have a few options. Option one, you can beg them to be on time. You can explain how much it hurts you when they're late. You can get emotional about it. You can try to make them feel guilty. You can threaten to leave if they don't change. Option two, you can set a boundary. You can say, I value punctuality, and I need to be with someone who respects my time. Going forward, if you're more than 15 minutes late without communication, I'll assume you're not coming and I'll make other plans. Do you see the difference? Option one is about trying to control their behavior through emotional manipulation. Option two is about controlling your own response to their behavior. Option one is begging. Option two is boundaries. Option one makes you smaller. Option two preserves your dignity while giving the other person clear information about how to be in relationship with you. Boundaries aren't about punishment. They're about clarity. They're about creating the conditions for healthy relationships by being clear about what healthy looks like to you. When you have strong boundaries, you don't need to beg for respect because you're already respecting yourself. When you have clear standards, you don't need to beg for good treatment because you're already treating yourself well. This brings me to something crucial. The relationship you have with yourself is the template for every other relationship in your life. If you don't love yourself, you'll accept counterfeit love from others. If you don't respect yourself, you'll accept disrespect from others. If you don't pay attention to your own needs and desires, you'll desperately seek attention from others. The work of building mental strength starts with you. It starts with how you talk to yourself. It starts with how you treat yourself. It starts with how you view yourself. I want you to think about the voice in your head right now. What is it saying to you? Is it kind? Is it supportive? Is it encouraging? Or is it critical? Is it harsh? Is it constantly pointing out your flaws and failures? If you wouldn't let someone else talk to your best friend the way your inner voice talks to you, then you have some work to do on that relationship. Mental strength begins with self-compassion. It begins with treating yourself with the same kindness you would show to someone you love. It begins with speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a good friend who's going through a difficult time. When you're kind to yourself, you don't need to beg others to be kind to you. When you're patient with yourself, you don't need to beg others to be patient with you. When you love yourself, you don't need to beg others to love you. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice. It's something you have to work on every single day. But it's the most important work you'll ever do because it affects every other area of your life. Let me share a practice that changed my life. Every morning, before I check my phone, before I read the news, before I engage with the outside world, I spend 5 minutes having a conversation with myself. Not meditation, not affirmations, a real conversation. I ask myself, how are you feeling today? What do you need? What are you grateful for? What are you worried about? How can I take care of you today? And then I listen. I actually listen to what my inner voice has to say without judgment, without trying to fix or change anything. I just listen. This practice has taught me to be my own best friend instead of my own worst enemy. It's taught me to pay attention to my needs before they become desperate. It's taught me to love myself in real time, not as a reward for achievement or good behavior. When you love yourself consistently, unconditionally, you become unavailable for relationships that require you to abandon yourself. When you respect yourself deeply, you become uninterested in people who don't know how to respect you. When you give yourself the attention you need, you stop being desperate for attention from others. This is the foundation of mental strength, a solid, loving, respectful relationship with yourself. But let's talk about what happens when you encounter people who are threatened by your mental strength, because they exist and you need to be prepared for them. Some people are invested in your insecurity. Some people benefit from your willingness to beg. Some people feel powerful when you feel powerless. When you stop begging and start being, these people will often try to pull you back into old patterns. They might call you arrogant when you're actually just confident. They might call you selfish when you're actually just setting boundaries. They might call you difficult when you're actually just clear about your standards. This is a test of your mental strength. This is where you get to practice staying in your truth even when people are pressuring you to abandon it. I remember when I first started setting boundaries in my career, some people were not happy about it. I had agents who told me I was being unrealistic. I had directors who told me I was being difficult. I had journalists who suggested I was becoming too Hollywood for my own good. For a moment, I doubted myself. Maybe I was being unrealistic. Maybe I was being difficult. Maybe I should go back to being more accommodating, more grateful, more willing to accept whatever was offered to me. But then I remembered, the people who were calling me difficult were the same people who had been taking advantage of my accommodating nature. The people who were saying I was being unrealistic were the same people who were benefiting from my low standards. Their resistance to my boundaries was actually confirmation that my boundaries were necessary. When you stop begging for love, the people who were getting your love without giving love in return will be upset. When you stop begging for attention, the people who were taking your attention without giving attention in return will be frustrated. When you stop begging for respect, the people who were disrespecting you will be angry. Their negative reaction isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something right. Mental strength means being okay with other people being upset about your growth. It means understanding that not everyone will celebrate your transformation. It means being willing to lose some people in order to find yourself. This is perhaps the hardest part of the journey. It's one thing to decide to stop begging. It's another thing to actually follow through when the people in your life are pressuring you to go back to old patterns. But here's what I want you to remember. Anyone who gets upset about your healthy boundaries didn't have your best interests at heart in the first place. Anyone who's threatened by your self-respect was probably disrespecting you. Anyone who's frustrated by your self-love was probably not loving you properly. Your mental strength will reveal who's really in your corner and who was just taking advantage of your insecurity. Let me tell you about forgiveness, because this journey isn't just about changing your behavior going forward. It's also about making peace with your past. It's about forgiving yourself for all the times you begged for love, attention, and respect. It's about forgiving yourself for all the times you made yourself small to make others comfortable. You did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. You were operating from the programming you received. The wounds you carry